Anybody that tells you they know what Lake Michigan is going to do is probably lying to you, frankly, because there's so many factors that go into it that are above my head, even that you can have a pretty good sense of, I'd bet this in the next couple of months, but anything outside of that is an educated guess.
Zach Vandenberg, welcome to Keys to the Community.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you could join us. There's so many questions I have about what it is you do and how you do it. And a lot of that has to do with working with government entities and EGLE and all the rest. But before we get there, tell us about Zach.
Yeah, I born and raised West Michigan, very familiar with the area, love the area. Went to school at Grand Valley, natural resource management degree there. And since graduating, I've been pretty strictly in the environmental consulting field. Worked for Peterson Environmental for a while, and that got converted to Peterson and Vandenberg Environmental roughly 4 or 5 years ago. We've just been in that consulting space ever since.
And the Peterson Vandenberg Consulting, where you're located in Holland, and how many people do you employ and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we're actually in Nunica, which a lot of people
Oh,
don't know where that is,
okay.
but you
Yeah.
think of Grand Haven Spring Lake and go about 5 miles east of there, and that's Nunica. It's not even one stoplight. But yeah,
Okay.
we have Adrian and I, and then we have three full timers and then one part timer as well. And every summer we try to get an intern too, just to
Sure.
help fill some gaps when we get busy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what is the primary work that you do?
Yeah, so environmental consulting has a lot of different avenues, anything from contamination, air quality, things like that. What we sort of focus on is water resources. So in Michigan's one of, I think, two states in the US that administers the Clean Water Act on a state level. That in Michigan is administered by the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. Used to be DEQ, now EGLE. They have a division called the Water Resources Division, and that division is kind of where we focus our time on. So, there's a number of different regulatory statutes. They include floodplains, inland lakes and streams, wetlands, critical dunes, high risk erosion areas, to name a few. So that's kind of where we
Sure.
specialize, is in those water resources.
It's so, are you getting involved with homeowners, landowners, developers? Is the government calling you? Who are you working for or with?
Yeah. So we are usually working on behalf of private citizens, whether that be Joe Schmo who has a 5 acre lot that's they're looking to develop, all the way up to commercial development, industrial development. Work occasionally with local agencies, drain commissioners, road commissions, things like that. But basically, we're typically working for some sort of person or entity that is looking to conduct a project that may have environmental water resource impacts.
Okay, interesting. All right. So, speaking of water resource impacts, boy, those YouTube videos I've been watching of Sheboygan and Traverse City, and oh my word, it's just crazy.
Yeah. I'm not sure how much rain we got recently, but just that one storm that came a couple days ago, I think they're reporting 3+ inches of rain in one night. So
Uh,
a lot of those dams are under stress right now. Dams are regulated under water resources, but typically you're going to have somebody with a PE behind their name that's
yeah,
designing that type of project. And we
sure.
work with a lot of engineers on stuff like that, but you want to make sure that things are built to withstand something like what we've been
Yeah.
seeing.
So, with maybe I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of something that doesn't apply to you, but with this flooding and the dams and all these sorts of things, will you get involved in the water resource part of that, or only if a developer had a plan and now it's underwater?
Yeah. So For dam projects, usually those are managed by the dam safety division of EGLE.
Mm.
If a dam blows out, there's definitely going to be resource impacts, and there's going to be some sort of project that's necessary, which may require impacts to wetlands or impacts to the stream itself. So environmental consultants do get involved with projects like that, but as far as like the actual design of repairing a dam or something like that, that would be on an engineer, where we would help coordinate with the government agency using that design.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah. So anytime I see a home being built along Lake Michigan, I think of Zach, because at some point in time, you're going to be involved in that, I would think, because of our lakes, streams, and dunes, and getting those permits put in place. Is that true when I drive by there? Is it true that I should be thinking of you in all of those areas?
To take a step back, anytime you see a vacant lot, there's probably some indication that you might want to at least reach out to somebody that knows water resources, because West Michigan is highly developable, desirable. So if you have a vacant lot, there is probably, not always, but there's probably a reason it's still vacant. You do see a lot of properties that don't have any issues, but yeah, so vacant lots in general, I would say, might be worth at least an email or something like that. But as far as critical dunes, high risk erosion, when you're building on Lake Michigan, probably 75+% of the time is going to require some sort of permit from a state level. The two statutes that regulate building along Lake Michigan are critical dunes and high risk erosion areas. There are some properties that are neither. There are some properties that are both. And then there's some properties that are one or the other. So if you are in one of those areas, the statutes differ, but typically a house project, whether it be tear down, rebuild, or adding an addition, or if you're in the critical dune area, you could be just repaving a driveway, or you could be proposing a fire pit or something like that. But yeah, in most, long answer to your question is, if you're on Lake Michigan, there's a pretty measurable chance that some sort of permit from EGLE is going to be required.
And I would know that by contacting you and saying, hey, Zach, I want to add on to my deck, or I want to put this fireplace structure out there, fire pit structure. You would know immediately whether or not that's something we need to get a permit for, or
Yeah. EGLE has a database. You could just type in on Google EGLE Explorer, and it's probably going to be the first link that you find. It'll give you a map of Michigan, and you navigate to where your property is located. And then there's a bunch of different layers that if you look at one, I think it's called Coastal tab, and then it'll show a drop-down menu with critical dunes and high-risk erosion areas. When you click on those, you'll get either a red polygon or a blue polygon, and those delineate critical dunes and high-risk erosion areas. So if you know your property address, or you know where it's located, or if you email me, that's what I'll do. I'll go look it up and let you know what areas you're in, and that at least gives you a sense of if you're in those areas. If you find out that you are in those areas, the statutes differ quite a bit. So in some circumstances, depending on what your project is, it may or may not be regulated under those critical dunes or high-risk erosion areas. But for the average person that's just curious if they are in one of those areas, it's pretty straightforward, just navigating through that map. So yeah.
And do those maps change from time to time, or are they pretty static?
Theoretically, they could change. I don't believe they have since 1989. So it's been some time. There's been talks about EGLE adjusting the critical dune boundary specifically. I'm not sure the timeline on that, but I would think that if they do change, those maps online would also change.
Okay. Do you get involved in the wetlands as well then, in terms of determining whether a property is in a wetland?
Yes, I would say me specifically, I work more in wetlands than critical dunes, high risk erosion. I do both, but just the divide and conquer way that we handle things, I do a lot more wetland work. So we do a number of different number of different services, anywhere from just like an in-office, super rough, this is what may or may not be wetland. A lot of disclaimers with that because we're not actually on site, but we can start there. And then one step up from that is, hey, let's just walk it either on our own or with a prospective buyer or a current owner. And let's just see, is the whole thing wet? Is the northeast corridor wet? Those are what we call preliminary wetland determinations. They're going to be more accurate than just looking from a computer. And they give you a rough sense of what the wetland extent is on a property, but they're not going to be pinpoint accurate. And then from there, the most accurate would be a full-blown wetland delineation where we're actually going out, taking quite a few sample points, looking at vegetation and soils, and then physically hanging flags on the property showing what our opinion is of the wetland boundary itself. And then we can GPS those and get within a couple centimeters of accuracy. So anywhere from just taking a peek in the office to spending quite a bit of time on site trying to dial in that boundary as accurately as possible.
So did you just say within centimeters?
Yeah, our
Oh my.
technology's come a long ways, and I'm by no means the technology guy, but I have been told that our accuracy is within a couple centimeters, obviously.
Wow.
Depending on cloud cover and tree cover and things like that.
Wow, that's crazy. Does a wetland area? No, I'm not asking that question correctly. Is the state responsible for determining the definition of a wetland, or is that a federal, or does that come down to the counties? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So the wetland delineation process is done in accordance with a manual that was published by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is a federal agency. That is how delineators in Michigan are going to conduct wetland delineations, and that's the methodology that EGLE also requires as well. So it is a federal determination of what constitutes a wetland versus what doesn't, and then that sort of trickles down into your state regulation, and then a lot of local agencies, townships and cities are starting to implement wetland ordinances at a local level as well.
And so, as a part of your role, you just have to be reading all the time because these ordinances must be changing constantly, I would think.
Yeah, locally, potentially, because
Yeah.
local ordinances change. That's just the
Yeah.
nature of being a local ordinance. The state and federal regulations change occasionally. There was a famous federal case, the Sackett case, that happened out west a number of years ago that changed the regulatory jurisdiction of wetlands. It changed the definition of waters of the United States. So that changed at the federal level. During that change, the state of Michigan, EGLE, did not change how they regulate wetlands. So it didn't, that federal change didn't really affect Michiganders a whole lot because the state still took the same stance on when a wetland is regulated in Michigan.
Okay. Interesting. Does a flood zone change?
So I'm not a floodplain engineer. We do
Okay.
floodplain permitting. I can tell you they do change, but without the knowledge of how they change, those are usually
Yeah.
determined by FEMA.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We're able to determine what the floodplain elevation is and then work through any permitting processes for structures or fill or excavation in a floodplain.
Okay. Okay. So when I hear you talk about permitting, EGLE, federal government, local government, I think of, boy, this is going to take some time. I have a piece of land, I want to put a house on it or development or something like that. Is this a many months to a year kind of process, or does it go quicker than that? I guess it depends on the scope, but
Yeah, you said it. Our goal is to try to get through a permitting process as efficiently as possible. You know, less time, less money, things like that. So in having that as one of our goals, like a developer is going to reach out to us with a piece of property, with a project, And with the experience and knowing how these processes go, we might have some initial input. We might have a number of rounds of revisions to a project to try to minimize impacts to these resources. Can we narrow up some impacts for roads or things like that? Or can we make side slopes a little bit steeper? So our goal is to, prior to going to permitting agencies, try to adjust a project to allow it to go through a permit process as smoothly as we can. That being said, there are, like at the state level, there are statutory deadlines that agencies have to review a project. For example, if you're proposing wetland impacts only, the total, including the administrative completeness review, is the total project timeline is 120 days by statute. If you're working in inland lakes and streams or most other regulated areas, that total processing timeline is 90 days by statute. There are also some things that can pause those deadlines. Most projects, when you submit them, there's going to be at least a couple of requests for additional information or clarification that an agency rep might have. When they do request that information, that deadline is paused. It doesn't restart, but it's paused. And then once you respond with that additional information, then it continues on. A lot of the staff in EGLE specifically is very busy. So I tell clients, like, they have this much time, let's plan on this much time, and anything less than that is a bonus, basically.
Yeah, sure. When you say EGLE is very busy, is that because of staffing or is it because of the growth in West Michigan, or both?
I could only speculate. What I've noticed is, so let's take wetlands and inland lakes, for example. Each staffer at EGLE has a set area that they oversee for permits. My experience has been that there are some areas that are higher development than other areas, and that correlates with how busy the reviewer is because they have more projects coming in and the same amount of time as other reviewers. So
sure.
Ottawa County, very busy area. Holland, Zeeland, Grand Haven, very busy area. Kent County, obviously, with Grand Rapids, is busy. It's pretty correlated to what most folks see with what's the population growth, basically.
Yeah, sure. My mind goes back, you said inland lakes and so on. So my mind goes back to how we started the conversation about the different flooding that's going on the rivers. So if I have a cottage on a river somewhere in Michigan, do I need to get you involved in order to put a dock out?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
The state, Part 301, Inland Lakes and Streams, regulates structure placement, permanent structure placement, dredging, excavation, placing of fill material, whether that be riprap for shoreline protection or some other fill that you're proposing. Anything in an inland lake or stream requires a permit from EGLE. The reason I say permanent structures is there is an exemption for seasonal recreational structures for residential use. So if you live on a small inland lake and you put in a seasonal dock every year and then pull it out in the fall every year, that would not be subject to jurisdiction by EGLE. If you live on a large inland lake, Spring Lake, Lake Makatawa, those are kind of the nearby ones, those would also be regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers because they're designated navigable waterways. Most folks don't know this, but technically a seasonal dock installed on a water body regulated by the Army Corps requires an Army Corps permit. Most people I don't know do, but whenever I'm at a property talking about options with folks, they want a permanent dock and they have a couple seasonal boat hoists that they plan to use. I'll tell them, hey, we're going for this permit anyways. We should just include the seasonal hoists just to make sure you're compliant with not only EGLE but with the Army Corps as well.
Interesting.
Before we continue, I'd like to give a big shout out to our amazing sponsors for making this podcast possible. Lighthouse Title, Independent Bank, Josh DeVries, mortgage lender, Cooper Insurance, Jose Morales, in partnership with Fremont Mutual Insurance. Thank you for your support. Check out their info in the description below. Let's dive back in.
And so that is a different application process and a different cost and a different timeline, I'm assuming.
It is. The nice thing is when you're in a water body or you're in some sort of regulated feature that requires both EGLE and Army Corps permits, you're able to submit one permit jointly to both agencies.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
So the timing is a little bit different. The Army Corps doesn't have those statutory deadlines that I was mentioning with EGLE. So their timing as far as turning around a permit is even more highly dependent on who gets assigned and how busy those folks are. I've had permits that we are able to get Army Corps permits first before EGLE. I would say probably 90% of the projects I work on, the Army Corps will come after EGLE. They wait for EGLE to issue a permit before they finalize up their review, and it can be weeks or months until you get the Army Corps permit.
Yeah, sure. And so they would come into play, just to make sure I understand this correctly, if I had a home on a navigable waterway, that's when I need to get them involved.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically think about any water body that has a direct connection. If we're living in West Michigan, a direct connection to Lake Michigan, Lake Macatawa, the Grand River, Kalamazoo River, any of those. Again, you can go online and type in Michigan navigable waters, and might be a couple links down on that one, but there's a PDF that lists south to north what all the navigable waters are and when they stop. For example, the Grand River is navigable until, don't quote me on this, but I think it's the Fulton Street Bridge in Grand Rapids. So anything between Grand Rapids and Grand Haven is going to be Corps regulated, Army Corps regulated.
Okay. I didn't intend to ask about this, but you just brought up the Grand Rapids and the Grand River. That is quite an amazing project they have going on there with taking the dams out?
Yeah. My knowledge on that is probably about what yours is, because I haven't been involved with it.
Sure.
The only thing that I know is they're trying to restore stream function, I believe. Dams obviously break up streams and can impact all sorts of things from an environmental standpoint. So that's my overview knowledge of it.
Yeah, mine too. Which leads me to, I should probably ask someone to join the podcast to talk about that, because that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So I know this was a big deal a few years ago when we had all the erosion on Lake Michigan and people were maybe throwing some cement out there or some sandbags or whatever, and then now their stairs were wrecked, and now I want to put stairs back out there again. That's, again, I know you're not specifically in the dune area, you're more in the wetlands and so on, but when I get into those types of things, that is, again, when I need your services to get the permits put in place so that I can do that, correct?
Yeah. So I don't know how many shoreline jobs that we worked on during the last high water period. We estimate over 1,000, but it was crazy. It was unprecedented for me because I had never seen water that high, but also there has never been a higher water period since we've been recording Lake Michigan water levels. So from that perspective, yes, any type of shoreline work along Lake Michigan would require a permit. You mentioned stairs. Technically, even in a critical dune area, stairs are one of a few, there's very few, but maybe one of 13 activities that EGLE does not take jurisdiction over. So you're able to put in stairs without an EGLE permit as long as you're not continuing those stairs onto the beach, basically. I believe you still need a building permit from your local township or city, but from an EGLE standpoint, elevated stairs, as long as they meet a couple of different criteria, they're exempt from needing an EGLE permit.
Wow, that surprises me. I would think they'd have jurisdiction in that area. Interesting.
Yeah, boardwalks, elevated stairways, mailboxes, flagpoles, to name a few things that don't need a permit. But if you're in
Yeah.
the critical dune area, it's easier to tell you what does not need a permit because
Mm.
everything else does.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So in the number of years that you've been doing this, you must have one crazy story. Either how well it turned out or, oh my goodness, I can't believe it took us another year to get this done. Everybody likes to hear a story, Zach.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about high water. There, I did have a project that was in need of shoreline protection on Lake Michigan. And I remember this one specifically because we met with the client and we met him at his, we call it a roadside doorway. And super friendly guy. Yeah, I think it might be time to start thinking about doing something because there wasn't much room between his house and the road. So there wasn't really an opportunity to do any house relocation work. So yeah, just super friendly saying, I figure it's probably time. I'd like to get started on the process. And we walk around back and I'm pretty sure the first thing I said to the guy was like, I would be hesitant to sleep here tonight, basically.
Oh, wow.
You know, his foundation was undermined already.
Oh,
And we ended up having to I remember that one as well because we were working on Thanksgiving trying to pull all of the paperwork together like same day as an
wow.
emergency situation. So that was an interesting one. We ended up
Yeah,
getting the permit ultimately, but the 2020, anywhere from 2018 to 2021 was a hectic time to say the least.
yeah, for sure.
And which is crazy. We're talking about flooding and things like that now, but actually the water now, at least on Lake Michigan, it might have changed since the last time I looked, but this year it's been roughly 5 vertical feet lower than 2020. So we're not doing as much shoreline protection anymore, but the big issue that we're seeing now is folks can't get to their dock with their boat.
Yeah, yeah,
So we've been seeing a lot of dock extension projects and even more dredging projects where marina basins they don't have enough depth to service their larger boats, or, you know, just a private property owner that has been docking there for decades and no longer can do
yeah,
so.
yeah.
So that's kind of been the hot topic the past year or two, I'd say, is actually dredge work rather than
Yeah.
shoreline protection.
I was talking to someone down in Saugatuck this past week, and their boat the water is 3 inches lower than where it was a year ago. But he checked the Army Corps of Engineers report, and they say it's supposed to go up 4 inches. So a net of an inch, which he's very much hoping so, because then his props won't be hitting the bottom of Lake Kalamazoo, or excuse me, Kalamazoo River.
Yeah. Yeah. The Army Corps does a good job of those projections. They typically project out 6 months. The I guess on their end, they have their projection, but they also have like almost a funnel that shows within this range. And there's a lot of variability there. Anywhere within that range, it could be up 4 inches to down 3 inches in the next 6 months. And then anybody that tells you they know what Lake Michigan is going to do is probably lying to you, frankly, because there's so many factors that go into it that are above my head, even, that you can have a pretty good sense of, I'd bet this in the next couple of months, but anything outside of that is an educated guess.
So if I own a home on Spring Lake and I have a dock out there and I can't get my boat into it, and I want an extension, or I want to talk about dredging to get the boat in there, that's where you get involved as well then.
Correct. Yeah, we've
Okay.
just this year alone, we've done quite a few dock extensions and dredge projects, and it depends on the homeowner what they would prefer. Some people don't want their dock sticking too far out in the lake. EGLE doesn't prefer that either. But then on the flip side, dredging, you're able to access the current dock, but depending on where you are in the lake too, eventually you're going to have sedimentation into that dredged area. And so there's some sort of aspect of how much future maintenance are we going to need in perpetuity to maintain this. And we're at a low water period right now, so under most circumstances, you're probably fine. So if you only need a little bit, maybe it'd be better just to dredge it. It'd be cheaper probably. And then when the water comes up, you don't have any issues. But I've seen docks that they were able to access 3 or 4 years ago that now have less than a foot of depth and are just completely unaccessible or inaccessible.
Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. So, Zach, as we wrap up, if someone wanted to contact you or learn more about you and your company, how could they find you?
Yeah, you can email me, Zach, Z-A-C-H, not Z-A-C-K, at petersonenviro.com. And then our website, too, is just petersonenviro.com. So all of our contact information is on our website.
And I would, as you said earlier, you had 1,000 projects with the shoreline before, and right now you said that the docks and dredging are a hot topic. Anything from EGLE that's coming up that maybe the viewer should be aware of?
Not specifically to a particular statute. There's a lot of push right now to stray away from talking about shoreline protection, mainly inland lake shoreline protection. There's a lot of push right now to stray away from vertical retention, seawalls, and drive applicants towards more natural means of shoreline protection. Like vertical walls are going to be really the least desirable from EGLE's standpoint. You step down to a more typical riprap or revetment, a little better than a seawall. And then right now, what I've seen in particular is they're really pushing for what they call bioengineered shoreline protection. So that type of protection utilizes a combination of some rock, but mainly focusing on natural materials and plants, because at one point in time, a lot of our lakes did not have any people living on them, and they did not experience erosion and did just fine with roots holding them in place. And so I don't think that bioengineering is the solution in every situation, personally. Others may disagree, but there are definitely some applications where it's relevant to do something a little more natural. And you can make it look pretty aesthetic too. There's a lot of shrubs that are basically garden shrubs that are native, and they're pretty aesthetic. So it gives those properties more of like a cabin feel, which some people like, some people don't. But that is one thing that the state is really pushing for recently that I've seen.
So that's interesting to me, because if I have a seawall of some sort, the erosion issue is taken care of immediately.
Mm-hmm.
If I do this bioengineered, it's going to take some time for my plants to grow on and get roots set and that kind of thing. So I could, except the rocks are in there, but I could have more erosion by the time that all sets up, right?
Yeah, so walls are very good at stopping the problem right away. They typically are higher cost than something less intrusive. The bioengineering is going to be less cost than a wall initially. It does have a little more maintenance cost, especially in that initial couple of years while those roots are establishing. You got to make sure that you're replacing plants that aren't successful. But I guess long term, site dependent, I don't want to say it again. My opinion is it's not always the best option, but in cases where it might work well, it's more of, you got a little more initial maintenance, and then as things establish, your maintenance goes down and down until you have more of a natural shoreline that's held in place with more natural measures.
Yeah, very interesting. You've You've tripped my trigger to do some more research on that one. I want to read more about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, a lot of clients aren't super gung-ho about it, but the question was, what is the trends in EGLE? And I would say that's one of them, that they're really pushing for that. And from an environmental perspective, it is less environmentally impactful.
Okay. Well, Zach, I appreciate you joining the Keys to the community today and sharing your knowledge, the go-to resource here for wetlands and dunes and everything else. So I really appreciate it. And thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, not a problem. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Yep, see ya.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Keys to the Community. Make sure you subscribe and stay connected to what's happening across West Michigan. And if real estate is on your mind, reach out. I'd love to help.